They humiliated me at my cousin's wedding, then I revealed I own the resort where they got married and… The security guard looked at me like I'd just stepped off a garbage truck. His eyes traveled from my worn sneakers to my faded denim jacket, and I could practically see him calculating that I'd taken a wrong turn somewhere between the highway and civilization. He stepped forward, blocking my path to the Ocean View Paradise Resort's grand entrance with all the authority of someone who'd probably been promoted yesterday. I told him I was here for the Martinez-Blackwell wedding, and the look he gave me could have frozen hell over. He actually laughed, a condescending chuckle that made my teeth clench, then pointed his meaty finger toward the back of the property where a weathered sign read "Staff Entrance, Deliveries Only." Apparently, people who looked like me weren't worthy of the marble steps and fountain display. My name is Elena Martinez. I'm 34 years old. And at that moment, standing in my deliberately casual clothes with my hair in a simple ponytail, I probably looked like I was there to drop off the wedding cake. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me, considering what I actually did for a living. But I kept my expression neutral. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is the one they never see coming. Before we continue, if this kind of story is your thing, subscribe to Bridal Confessions. It really helps the channel grow, and we truly appreciate it. And if you have a story of your own, feel free to share it in the comments. We'd love to read it. My cousin Isabella had called me 3 weeks ago with the kind of excitement that usually precedes either great news or a complete disaster. She'd gushed about meeting the love of her life, Marcus Blackwell, whose family apparently owned half the businesses in the state. She'd made it very clear that this was a black tie affair, that the Blackwells were very particular about appearances, and that maybe I should try to dress up for once. She'd even offered to lend me something appropriate, which was code for "please don't embarrass me in front of my new rich in-laws." She'd also mentioned, oh so casually, that maybe I shouldn't talk too much about my work because the Blackwells might not understand what a virtual business consultant does, and it might sound, well, unemployed. The security guard was still staring at me, his radio crackling with self-importance. I could have pulled out my phone and made one call that would have changed everything. Could have shown him the deed to the property he was standing on. But where was the entertainment in that? Instead, I smiled sweetly and headed toward the staff entrance, my comfortable shoes making soft sounds against the cobblestone path. The route took me past the kitchens, where I could hear the controlled chaos of a wedding reception being prepared, the clatter of dishes and rapid-fire Spanish from the culinary team. Just as I reached the back door, a sharp voice cut through the afternoon air. Marcus Blackwell himself, resplendent in what looked like a custom Italian suit that cost more than most people's cars, came striding across the lawn. His mother, Catherine Blackwell, clicked along beside him in heels that definitely weren't made for grass. They both looked right at me, and I saw Marcus's face twist into something between confusion and disgust. He called out to the security guard, asking why the help was wandering around the guest areas. The security guard jogged over, explaining that he'd redirected the lost delivery person to the proper entrance. Catherine actually put her hand to her chest like she was clutching pearls. She turned to her son and said something about how they'd specifically requested that all vendors use the back entrance to avoid mixing with their guests. These people, she said with a dismissive wave. They never follow instructions. These people. Her future daughter-in-law's cousin. I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste blood and walked through that staff entrance with my dignity intact, even if my pride was screaming. The kitchen was a symphony of controlled madness. Stainless steel surfaces gleamed under fluorescent lights, and the air smelled like butter, fresh herbs, and expensive protein. The head chef, a woman named Rosa who I'd hired personally 2 years ago, immediately spotted me and her eyes went wide. Before she could say anything, I put my finger to my lips and shook my head slightly. She understood immediately, bless her, and went back to barking orders at her team. A young sous chef, probably assuming I was the replacement server they'd requested, thrust an apron at me and pointed toward a station piled high with vegetables. Within minutes, I was stationed at a prep table, supposedly on garnish duty for the appetizers. The kitchen staff buzzed around me, too focused on executing a flawless service to pay attention to the new face among them. But I was paying attention to them, to their gossip, to the stories flowing as freely as the champagne that would soon be served. The servers were already bringing back intelligence from the ceremony. Apparently, Marcus had been late to his own wedding, keeping Isabella waiting at the altar for 15 minutes while he took a business call. The photographer had caught Isabella's face during those minutes, and according to the server who'd seen the preview, she looked like she was reconsidering every life choice that had led to that moment. But the real gossip was about the Blackwells. The family had arrived in a fleet of luxury cars, but one of the valets mentioned that 2 of the vehicles were rentals, not owned. The florist had complained that Catherine had tried to negotiate the bill down by 40% at the last minute, claiming the arrangements weren't up to standard, even though they were exactly what she'd ordered. One of the bartenders mentioned that Marcus's brother, Devin, had tried to run a tab and seemed annoyed when told that all drinks were prepaid and limited. The wedding planner had apparently quit 2 days before the event, and the resort's event coordinator had to step in at the last minute because Catherine had driven the original planner to tears with her demands and budget cuts. I kept my hands busy with garnishes while my mind cataloged every piece of information. The picture forming wasn't matching the image of old money sophistication that the Blackwells were projecting. The kitchen doors burst open like something out of a dramatic movie scene, and Marcus strode in like he owned the place. Which, if we're being technical about it, he didn't. I did. His face was red, that particular shade that meant someone somewhere had committed the cardinal sin of not meeting his expectations. He demanded to know why the champagne wasn't the brand he'd specifically requested. Rosa, to her credit, calmly explained that the brand he'd requested had been changed 3 times, and the current selection was what had been confirmed in writing just yesterday. Marcus wasn't interested in facts or confirmations. He wanted what he wanted, and what he wanted was to feel important and in control. He swept past the prep station where I was working, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive and overwhelming that probably cost $300 a bottle. He didn't glance at me. To him, I was part of the scenery, as invisible as the stainless steel counters and the tile floor. After he stormed back out, one of the servers muttered that Catherine had been in the bridal suite earlier, going through Isabella's belongings. Another server confirmed she'd seen Catherine photographing something, though she couldn't tell what. The pastry chef mentioned that the wedding cake payment had been disputed, with Catherine claiming the design wasn't what she'd approved, even though she'd signed off on it just last week. I finished my garnish duty and told Rosa I needed a break. She nodded knowingly, and I slipped out of the kitchen through the service corridor. The staff elevator was empty, which was perfect because I needed a moment away from the performance downstairs. I pressed the button for the penthouse level, not the event floor, but the one above it, the executive suite. The one that was mine. For years ago, I'd bought the Ocean View Paradise Resort. Not with family money or a trust fund, but with every penny I'd saved from building and selling a software company that revolutionized hotel management systems. That first company had been my baby, built from nothing in a cramped apartment with maxed-out credit cards and more rejection letters than I could count. When I sold it, I could have retired. Instead, I'd invested in real estate, starting with this struggling resort that everyone said was a lost cause. The renovation had been brutal. I'd worked alongside the construction crews, learned the hospitality business from the ground up, and turned this property into one of the most sought-after wedding venues on the coast. Then I'd acquired 2 more resorts, then 5, and now I had a portfolio of 12 luxury properties across 3 states. The elevator doors opened to my private office suite, and I used my fingerprint to unlock the door. The space was everything the chaos downstairs wasn't: quiet, organized, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean. My assistant had left the weekly reports on my desk, but I wasn't interested in numbers right now. I was interested in the security monitors showing every public area of the resort. I pulled up the camera feeds on my laptop and started scanning through them. There was the ceremony space, being reset for the cocktail hour. There was the ballroom, looking like something out of a fairy tale with its crystal chandeliers and elaborate floral arrangements that Catherine had nearly bankrupted herself over. And there were the Blackwells, holding court near the resort's signature fountain. Catherine looked like she'd been vacuum sealed into her dress, and her face had that particular smoothness that suggested her dermatologist had a very steady hand with Botox. She was surrounded by what looked like her country club friends, all of them dressed in designer labels and practiced expressions of superiority. The story of how I'd built this empire while my family thought I was barely scraping by with freelance consulting work was almost comedic in hindsight. Isabella had been so proud of her marketing manager position at a mid-level firm, always quick to send me job postings and offer career advice. She'd even suggested I might want to go back to school to make myself more marketable. Meanwhile, I'd been quietly building a hospitality empire, one property at a time. The first resort had been a gamble that kept me up at night for months. But I'd seen its potential, seen what it could become with the right vision and management. The transformation had been my masterpiece, and it had opened doors to acquisitions I'd only dreamed about. If you're still with me and enjoying this tale of family drama and hidden success, please take a quick second to subscribe to the channel. Your support means everything, and trust me, the best part is yet to come. I zoomed in on one of the security feeds just in time to catch something interesting. Catherine was having what looked like an intense conversation with someone I didn't recognize, a man in a suit who definitely wasn't on the guest list. She was pressing something into his hand, and the exchange had all the subtlety of a drug deal in a church parking lot. The man nodded, pocketed whatever she'd given him, and headed toward the ballroom. Curious, I rewound the footage and watched their entire interaction. The audio was muffled by the fountain, but the body language was crystal clear. Catherine was giving instructions, pointing toward various areas of the resort, and the man was nodding along like an eager student. This wasn't about champagne brands or flower arrangements. This was something else entirely. I made a quick call to my head of security, Jake, and asked him to keep eyes on the situation. He confirmed the man wasn't on any approved vendor list and agreed to shadow him discreetly. Then I changed out of my prep cook disguise and back into my casual clothes. If Catherine Blackwell wanted to play games in my house, she was about to learn that the house always had the advantage. I pulled up more security footage, this time from earlier in the day. There was Catherine in Isabella's bridal suite, just as the server had reported. The angle wasn't perfect, but I could clearly see her going through Isabella's purse, photographing credit cards and identification. That was identity theft, plain and simple, and it suggested a level of desperation that went beyond just being controlling. A few quick searches on my phone, calling in some favors from my network, and the picture became clearer. The Blackwells weren't just controlling and pretentious. They were broke. Not just cash flow problems broke, but drowning in debt and about to lose everything broke. Their flagship business, a chain of car dealerships that Marcus supposedly ran, had filed for bankruptcy protection 6 months ago. Their family estate had 3 separate liens against it. Catherine's credit cards were maxed out, and there were judgments against them from multiple creditors. Even the luxury cars at the wedding were leased, and according to public records, they were behind on those payments too. Suddenly, everything made sense. The last-minute budget cuts, the disputes with vendors, the desperate need to project wealth and status. They weren't worried that Isabella wasn't good enough for Marcus. They were desperate for her to marry him because they thought my cousin's family had money. The cosmic irony of it all made me want to laugh. Here were the Blackwells, looking down on everyone with their manufactured superiority, while secretly hoping that Isabella's successful family would be their financial salvation. And here was Isabella, so desperate to marry into what she thought was old money that she'd been blind to every red flag. Back in my server disguise, I grabbed a tray of champagne flutes and headed into the cocktail hour. The transformation from the service areas to the guest spaces was jarring. Isabella had gone for what could only be described as Gatsby meets Instagram, with enough flowers to supply a small country and lighting that probably cost more than the actual ceremony. I circulated through the crowd, invisible in that peculiar way service staff become at fancy events. Rich people have this remarkable ability to take drinks from your tray while looking straight through you, as if the champagne materialized through sheer force of will and social status. Catherine was holding court near the ice sculpture, a monstrosity shaped like a swan that was already starting to melt in the evening heat. She was explaining to a captive audience about the Blackwell family legacy, how they'd been pillars of the community for generations, how Marcus was continuing the family tradition of excellence and success. The disconnect between her words and reality was staggering. Every claim about their business success, every mention of their properties and investments, was either outdated by several years or complete fiction. But her audience was eating it up, impressed by her confidence and designer dress. Then I heard something that made me stop in my tracks. Catherine was telling Isabella's mother about how the families would need to discuss financial arrangements for the newlyweds. She made it sound generous and traditional, but I recognized it for what it was, a shakedown. She was suggesting that Isabella's family should contribute to Marcus's business ventures, to help the young couple get started, to invest in their future. Isabella's mother, bless her heart, was nodding along enthusiastically. She mentioned that I was doing very well with my business, that I would certainly want to invest in my cousin's happiness. Catherine's eyes actually lit up at that, like a shark smelling blood in the water. I nearly dropped my tray. Not only had Isabella clearly been talking me up to the Blackwells, but she'd apparently positioned me as the family's golden goose. The cousin who'd made it big with her mysterious business ventures and would definitely want to support her beloved cousin's marriage. Marcus's brother, Devin, who I'd learned was 2 years younger and somehow even more entitled, sidled up to me as I was refilling my tray. He had that look that certain men get when they think they're God's gift to everyone around them. Slicked back hair, a smile that had probably worked on countless bartenders and servers, and the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. He leaned in close, reeking of expensive cologne and cheaper judgment, and asked if I was working this event all night. I told him I'd be here as long as I was needed. He actually winked at me, like we were in some kind of romantic comedy where the rich boy sweeps the poor server off her feet. Then he slipped what he clearly thought was a generous tip onto my tray, a $100 bill, and suggested I find him later if I wanted to make some real money. The implications made my skin crawl, but I smiled and moved away, mentally adding his little proposition to the list of things that were about to make this evening very interesting. As I circulated, I heard more pieces of the puzzle falling into place. The Blackwells were name-dropping connections, discussing investments that sounded impressive but were vague enough to be meaningless. Devin was talking about his cryptocurrency portfolio, conveniently leaving out that the crypto market had crashed months ago and his investments were now worth about as much as Monopoly money. Marcus kept mentioning his dealerships in plural, as if the bankruptcy had never happened. Catherine discussed their country club membership, failing to mention that they'd been asked to leave after bouncing several checks. It was a masterclass in maintaining appearances while standing on the edge of financial ruin. During a quiet moment, I slipped back into the business center off the main hallway. I pulled up more detailed financial records, public documents that anyone could access if they knew where to look. The Blackwell situation was even worse than I'd initially thought. They were approximately 8 weeks away from losing everything, from foreclosure on their home to complete business collapse. This wedding wasn't a celebration. It was a Hail Mary pass, a desperate attempt to marry Marcus into what they hoped would be a financial lifeline. And Isabella, sweet, naive Isabella, had no idea she was being sized up for her bank account rather than her personality. I went back to serving drinks, but now I was really paying attention. Catherine was getting bolder, working the room like a politician, making connections with Isabella's family, asking pointed questions about businesses and investments. She was conducting reconnaissance, trying to figure out exactly how much money she could extract from this union. Isabella appeared in the doorway, looking absolutely stunning in her wedding dress, and the room broke into applause. She was glowing, radiating happiness, completely unaware that her new mother-in-law was already planning how to financially exploit her family. Marcus stood to greet her, and I had to admit, he played the doting groom well. If you didn't know he'd kept her waiting at the altar while he took a business call, you'd think he was genuinely in love. The party was in full swing when I spotted my general manager, David, standing near the ballroom entrance with a concerned expression and a folder in his hand. He was scanning the crowd, clearly looking for someone, and I had a pretty good idea what was in that folder. The Blackwell's check for the resort bill had just bounced, and David needed to handle it discreetly. I slipped back into the business center and called him. When he answered, I could hear the stress in his voice. The check had been returned for insufficient funds, and the backup credit card they'd provided was declined. They owed $68,000 for the venue, catering, and services, and they didn't have a penny to pay for it. I told David to give me 30 minutes before approaching anyone. He was confused, understandably, but he trusted me enough not to ask questions. That trust was worth every penny of his substantial salary, which was probably more than the Blackwells had in all their accounts combined. Back in the ballroom, Isabella had taken the microphone and was giving a speech that made my heart hurt. She was thanking everyone for coming, talking about how she'd found her perfect match, how the Blackwells had welcomed her into their family with open arms. She actually used the phrase, joining two wonderful families, and I watched Catherine's face attempt something that might have been a smile if Botox hadn't frozen her features into permanent semi-surprise. Isabella went on about how grateful she was for her family's support, how her successful cousin had always been an inspiration to her. Then, and this was the part that almost made me choke on air, she announced that I was secretly at the wedding observing everything and would be making a significant announcement later about a wedding gift. I nearly dropped my serving tray. Isabella was using me as a prop in her fantasy, not knowing I was standing 15 feet away holding champagne that was getting warm because everyone was too busy listening to her speech to drink. The man Catherine had bribed earlier was definitely up to something. I watched him on my phone, tracking him through the security cameras. He was near the sound system, and I recognized the setup immediately. In about 5 minutes, whatever Catherine had paid him to do would trigger, and based on the malicious smile on her face, it wasn't going to be celebration by Cool and the gang. I texted Jake to intercept whatever was about to happen with the sound system. He confirmed that he'd found a USB drive rigged to play an audio file at a specific time. He'd removed it and secured the evidence. Whatever sabotage Catherine had planned was now in my hands, literally. Devin cornered me again near the service station, and this time he was more aggressive. His hand actually landed on my lower back as he leaned in to tell me about his business ventures, how he could change my life if I was smart enough to take him up on his offer. The fact that his ventures were worth less than the bottle of champagne he was holding made his proposition even more pathetic. I excused myself, citing a need to refill my tray, and escaped before I did something that would definitely blow my cover. Like explaining exactly how many times over I could buy and sell his entire family, their cars, their clothes, and whatever dignity they still pretended to have. Rosa emerged from the kitchen looking like she'd survived a war. She found me at the service station and whispered that Catherine had been sending contradictory orders all evening, first moving dinner up by an hour, then back by 90 minutes, then to the original time but with completely different courses. The kitchen staff was ready to mutiny, and honestly, I didn't blame them. I made an executive decision and told Rosa to serve dinner at the original time with the original menu, exactly as planned. She looked at me skeptically. After all, I was supposedly just a random person who'd wandered into the kitchen earlier. But something in my tone must have convinced her, because she nodded and headed back to her domain. The audio file that Jake had confiscated was now on my phone, and it was even more damning than I'd expected. Catherine had created a fake recording, edited together from various sources, made to sound like Isabella trash-talking the Blackwell family. There were clips about Marcus being broke, about the family being con artists, about the wedding being a sham. It was crude and obvious, but in the moment it played, it would have caused absolute chaos. David finally made his way into the ballroom, folder in hand. I watched him navigate through the crowd, heading toward the head table where both families sat. The Blackwells looked regal in their borrowed finery, and Isabella's family looked like they were having the time of their lives, completely unaware of the financial disaster lurking beneath the surface. David leaned in to speak quietly to Isabella, probably asking to speak with Miss Martinez about an urgent matter. I saw Isabella's face light up. She stood, smoothing her wedding dress, ready to handle whatever minor crisis had occurred. But David walked right past her. He kept walking, scanning the room, and I knew the moment had arrived. I set down my serving tray on a nearby table and started walking toward him. Isabella was saying something confused, trying to call him back, insisting that she was Miss Martinez. But David wasn't listening anymore. He'd spotted me. The look on Isabella's face when David approached me, still in my faded jeans and casual jacket, was worth more than all 12 resorts in my portfolio. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish discovering that water wasn't actually water. Her eyes went wide with confusion, then embarrassment, then something that might have been the first flicker of understanding. David handed me the folder with a professional nod and said, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, "Miss Martinez, we have a situation with the Blackwell party payment. The check has been returned for insufficient funds, and the backup credit card has been declined. The outstanding balance is $68,000. The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop in the parking lot. Isabella's face went through about 7 different emotions in 3 seconds: confused, mortified, angry, disbelieving, and finally settling on horrified. Marcus stood up, his face going from tan to red to an interesting shade of purple. Catherine's Botox-frozen features couldn't quite manage shocked, but her eyes went wide enough to suggest that if her face could move, it would be expressing something close to panic. Isabella started to say something, probably about to insist that there must be some mistake, that I was just playing some kind of cruel prank. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. I untied my borrowed server's apron, which I'd put back on for effect, and handed it to a passing waiter. Then I turned to face the ballroom, all eyes now on me, and said in my clearest, most professional voice, "I think there's been some confusion tonight. My name is Elena Martinez, and I own this resort. In fact, I own 12 luxury resorts across 3 states." The gasps were audible. Someone dropped a glass, and it shattered against the marble floor with a sound like breaking expectations. Catherine's face tried to express shock, but the Botox held firm, giving her an expression more like she was trying to solve complex calculus in her head. Marcus looked like someone had just told him Santa Claus was real, but Santa was there to repossess his car. Isabella stood frozen, her beautiful wedding dress suddenly looking like a costume from a play that had gone horribly wrong. But I still wasn't done. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the ballroom's AV system, overriding the planned programming with the owner's access codes I'd installed in all my properties. The romantic slideshow of Marcus and Isabella that had been playing on the screens around the room flickered and died. In its place, security footage began to play. Crystal clear, high-definition evidence of the evening's real story. There was Catherine, bribing the man to sabotage the sound system. There she was again, going through Isabella's purse in the bridal suite, photographing credit cards and personal information. Then, in a move that I'd specifically saved for this moment, I played the audio file Catherine had tried to plant. But I played it in its obvious, edited form, with my security team's analysis showing exactly how it had been manipulated and fabricated. The room erupted. Catherine tried to speak, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound adequate to the situation emerged. Mr. Blackwell, Marcus's father, who'd been mostly silent all evening, looked like he wanted to sink through the floor and keep going until he hit the earth's core. Marcus stood frozen, looking between his mother and Isabella like he was watching a tennis match in purgatory. Devon tried to slip away toward the exit, but I wasn't letting him escape that easily. "Oh, Devon," I called out sweetly. "Before you go, did you still want to discuss that business proposition? The one where you offered me money to find you later? I have that conversation recorded too, if anyone's interested in hearing it." His face went from red to white to green, an entire Christmas color palette of mortification. Several people in the crowd pulled out their phones, clearly recording this entire disaster for posterity and social media. Isabella found her voice, and it was not happy. She turned on me with a fury I'd rarely seen, even from her. She accused me of sabotaging her wedding, of being jealous of her happiness, of deliberately humiliating her in front of everyone she cared about. She actually used the phrase, "You've always been jealous of me," which would have been laughable if it wasn't so sad. I let her rant for a full minute. She was on a roll, hitting all the greatest hits of family accusations: jealousy, pettiness, vindictiveness, attention-seeking. It was actually impressive how many accusations she could pack into such a short time. Then I held up the folder David had given me. The Blackwell's check bounced, I said simply, letting the words hang in the air. They don't have the money to pay for this wedding. In fact, according to public records, they don't have money for much of anything. I pulled up the documents on my phone and projected them onto the screens around the room. Property records showing 3 mortgages on the family estate. Court documents showing the bankruptcy of the dealerships. Credit reports, all publicly available information that anyone could access if they bothered to look, showing maxed-out credit cards and multiple judgments against them. The Blackwell family is approximately 8 weeks away from complete financial collapse, I continued, my voice steady despite the chaos erupting around me. They have been systematically attempting to assess your financial situation, Isabella, because they're desperate for someone to bail them out of their debt. Catherine tried to protest, but I cut her off. I have receipts, Mrs. Blackwell. Literally. You hired a private investigator to look into our family's finances 3 weeks ago. Here's the invoice, charged to a credit card that's currently $47,000 over its limit. I projected that evidence too, watching it appear on every screen in the ballroom. The investigator's report was detailed, showing exactly what they'd been trying to find out: net worth, liquid assets, investment portfolios, real estate holdings. They'd been sizing up Isabella's family like a mark in a con game. You went through my cousin's purse today, I continued, addressing Catherine directly. You photographed her credit cards and identification. That's identity theft, Mrs. Blackwell. I have you on camera. The room was in complete chaos now. Guests were whispering, some openly gasping, others recording every second on their phones. The Blackwells looked like they were melting into their chairs, their facade of superiority crumbling in real time. But the most important person was Isabella. My cousin stood there in her beautiful wedding dress, her carefully applied makeup starting to run as tears streamed down her face. She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time all evening, and I saw the moment it all clicked into place for her. You own this place, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crowd noise. All this time when I thought, your online consulting business. My online consulting business was a hotel management software platform, I explained gently. It became so successful that I sold it and used the profits to buy this resort. Then I acquired 11 more properties. I tried to tell you, Isabella. Multiple times. But you always changed the subject when I talked about work, always assumed I was struggling. Marcus finally spoke up, and his voice was surprisingly small. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what my mother was planning. But Isabella wasn't looking at him. She was looking at me, and her face was a mixture of shame, realization, and something that might have been the beginning of understanding. The job postings, she said slowly. All those times you sent me entry-level marketing positions. You thought I needed help. I thought you were my cousin who cared about me, I said softly. Not someone who was embarrassed by me. The Blackwells were trying to leave quietly, but I had one more card to play. Mrs. Blackwell, I called out. The man you paid to sabotage this wedding? He's actually my head of security. We have your entire conversation recorded, including the part where you discussed planting false evidence to make Isabella look bad so Marcus would call off the marriage and you could pursue a wealthier prospect. Catherine's face, frozen as it was, somehow managed to convey absolute horror. She grabbed her husband's arm and practically ran for the exit, her heels clicking frantically against the marble floor. Devon tried to follow, but not before stopping to mutter something about how this was all a misunderstanding and he'd been taken out of context. The security guard from earlier, the one who directed me to the service entrance, was standing by the door. The look on his face when he realized who I was could have powered a small city. He looked like he wanted to apologize, to explain, to somehow undo the last 4 hours of his life. Marcus stood there, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume he'd borrowed for a role he couldn't play. He turned to Isabella, and I saw genuine emotion in his eyes for the first time that evening. I knew my parents were struggling, he said quietly. I didn't know they were trying to con your family. I swear, Isabella, I didn't know about any of this. The ballroom was clearing out rapidly. Nothing kills a wedding reception like discovering the groom's family is broke and the bride's cousin owns the venue. But a small group remained, my family, some of Isabella's closest friends, and Marcus, standing there like a man watching his entire life collapse in slow motion. Isabella slowly walked over to where I stood. Her shoulders were shaking, and I expected another outburst, maybe anger or accusations. Instead, she threw her arms around me and sobbed into my shoulder, completely ruining my casual jacket with her makeup and tears. "I'm so sorry," she kept repeating. "I'm so sorry. I didn't see you. I didn't want to see you. I was so desperate to be something I'm not that I couldn't see who you really were." I hugged her back because despite everything, she was still my cousin. Despite the humiliation, the dismissal, the casual cruelty of being directed to the service entrance at her wedding, she was family. "If you'd just asked," I said quietly, "I would have helped. No conditions, no judgments. That's what family does." Marcus approached us slowly, like he was afraid I might have him thrown out too. And honestly, I was considering it. But I could see he was genuinely devastated by his parents' behavior, standing there in his expensive suit that his family couldn't actually afford. "I understand if you want to annul this," he said to Isabella. "My parents are. I don't even know what to call them. Criminals? Con artists? They tried to use you, and I'll never forgive them for that." Isabella looked at him, then at me, then back at him. Mascara streaked her face, her perfect wedding makeup now a disaster, but she'd never looked more real to me. "Your parents are terrible," she said bluntly. "Genuinely, spectacularly terrible people. But you stood there and admitted it. You didn't try to defend them or make excuses." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "I've been pretending to be someone I'm not. I've been terrible to my cousin, who apparently is incredibly successful, and I never bothered to notice. So we're both disasters, just in different ways." It wasn't the most romantic moment I'd ever witnessed, but it was honest. More honest than anything that had happened at that wedding so far. Marcus looked at her hopefully, and she looked at me. "Do we still have a venue?" she asked. "Or are you kicking us out?" I couldn't help but smile. "The venue is paid for," I said. "Consider it a wedding gift. But there are conditions." Over the next hour, as the remaining guests either left or settled in for the after-party drama, I laid out my terms. Marcus would work off the wedding debt, starting Monday morning in my resort's accounting department. Isabella would take a job in my company, starting from the ground up, learning the hospitality business the way I had, through actual work rather than pretense. "You'll start in housekeeping," I told Isabella. 5 a.m. shifts. Then you'll rotate through every department: front desk, maintenance, food service, event planning. You're going to learn how to treat people, starting with the staff you terrorized today." She nodded eagerly, mascara still streaking down her face. "I'll apologize to everyone. Chef Rosa, the servers, everyone. I was horrible." Marcus cleared his throat. "I have a degree in finance," he said quietly. "My parents never let me use it. They wanted me running the dealerships, living off the family name. Maybe I could actually do something legitimate for once." I studied him for a moment. He looked genuine, broken in a way that suggested he might actually be ready to change. "You'll be working under David, my general manager. He'll verify every number, every report. If I catch even a hint of anything shady, you're out and I'm pressing charges for fraud." "Understood. Understood," he said immediately. The security guard from earlier found me as I was wrapping things up. He apologized 17 times in about 30 seconds, which might have been a record. His face was the color of overcooked beets, and he looked like he might cry. I told him he was just doing his job, but maybe next time he should look at people's faces instead of making assumptions based on their clothes. He nodded so vigorously I thought his head might detach from his neck. "Yes, ma'am." "Miss Martinez." "Ma'am." "I mean, yes." Rosa and the entire kitchen staff were given the rest of the night off with full pay, plus substantial bonuses for dealing with the chaos. The leftover food, and there was a lot of it since half the guests had fled, was donated to local shelters. The elaborate flower arrangements went to nursing homes in the area. Nothing was wasted except the Blackwell's dignity, but they hadn't had much of that to begin with. I found David before I left and thanked him for his discretion and trust. He just smiled and said he'd known something was up the moment he saw me in the kitchen earlier. 20 years in hospitality, boss. I can spot an owner checking on their property from a mile away, even if they're wearing an apron. A week later, Isabella sent me a photo at 4:45 in the morning. She was in her housekeeping uniform, hair pulled back, no makeup, standing in front of one of the resort's service carts. The caption read, "Day 1 of learning who I really am. Thank you for not giving up on me." Marcus was in the accounting department, and according to David's reports, he was actually good at his job. Really good. He'd found several inefficiencies in our expense tracking system and had proposed solutions that would save the company thousands annually. Turns out when you're not spending all your energy maintaining a fake image, you have bandwidth for actual competence. They'd moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment about 10 minutes from the resort, paying their own rent for the first time in their lives. Isabella posted a photo of their apartment on social media with the caption, "Not fancy, but it's honestly ours." The post got more genuine engagement than any of her previous carefully curated content ever had. As for the Blackwells, they lost their estate 6 weeks later, exactly as predicted. Catherine tried to sue me for defamation and emotional distress, but it's hard to claim defamation when everything said about you is true, documented in public records, and captured on security video. Her lawyer withdrew from the case after the first hearing. They moved to Florida, where, according to my sources, Catherine was already trying to infiltrate country clubs and find the next wealthy family to exploit. Some people never learn. Mr. Blackwell got a job as a sales manager at a regular car dealership, not the owner, just an employee. It was probably the most honest work he'd done in decades. Devon's cryptocurrency ventures collapsed completely, and last I heard, he was working at a tech startup in Austin, probably telling anyone who'd listen about his family's former glory days. The irony of him having to actually work for a living wasn't lost on anyone who'd witnessed his behavior at the wedding. The security footage from that night became legendary among my staff. Someone set it to music, Gold Digger, naturally, and it became our unofficial training video. Not for what to do, but for what to watch out for. Red flags and guest behavior, signs of financial fraud, the importance of treating everyone with dignity regardless of their appearance. 3 months after the wedding, Isabella called me crying. I thought something terrible had happened, but she was crying because a guest had complimented her work. Just a simple, "Thank you for making our stay special," but it was the first time someone had appreciated her for what she did rather than what she pretended to be. "I get it now," she said through tears. "Why you do this? It's not about the money or the status. It's about creating something real." Marcus proposed to her again 6 months later. Not at a fancy venue or with an elaborate production, but in their modest apartment after a long day of work. He'd saved up for a modest ring, nothing like the ostentatious diamond his mother had insisted on the first time, and he asked if she'd marry him again, for real this time, not for show. She said yes, and they got married a month later in a simple ceremony at the resort's garden. I officiated, and the only guests were people who actually mattered to them, family, real friends, and several coworkers who'd seen them transform from entitled disasters into genuine human beings. Rosa catered, and it was perfect. Isabella insisted on using the service entrance for her bridal entrance. She said it was important, symbolic of where her real journey began. Marcus met her there, and they walked through the kitchen together, past the staff who'd witnessed the original disaster, to the garden where their small group of loved ones waited. The security guard, who still worked at the resort and had become significantly less judgmental about people's appearances, stood at attention by the service entrance. Isabella stopped and hugged him, told him he'd been doing his job that day, and thanked him for being part of her wake-up call. During their vows, Marcus acknowledged the disaster of their first wedding. "I stood up there and married you for all the wrong reasons," he said. "Because it was expected, because it maintained an image, because I was too scared to be real. Today, I'm marrying you because you're the person who pushed me to become someone worth being married to." Isabella's vows were even more powerful. "I was so busy trying to impress people who didn't matter that I almost lost the people who did. I directed my own cousin to the service entrance because I was embarrassed by her casual clothes, never bothering to see the incredible person underneath. Today, I'm marrying you with my eyes open, in a garden owned by that same cousin, wearing a dress that cost $300 instead of $30,000, and I've never been happier. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden, including mine. After the ceremony, we had a simple reception in one of the resort's smaller event spaces. No ice sculptures, no imported flowers, no pretense. Just good food, good company, and genuine joy. Rosa outdid herself with the food, creating a menu that was elegant but not ostentatious, delicious without being expensive for the sake of being expensive. The cake was a simple 3-tier design that actually tasted good rather than just looking impressive. During the reception, Isabella gave a speech thanking everyone for being there. But the real moment came when she turned to me. "My cousin Elena owns this resort," she said to the small crowd. But more importantly, she owned her truth when I was busy faking mine. She let me hit rock bottom that night 6 months ago because she knew I needed to. That's what real love looks like, not the enabling I mistook for support. She raised her glass. To Elena, who could have written me off but chose to write me a new chapter instead. To second chances and service entrances and learning that who you are is always better than who you pretend to be. The toast was echoed around the room, and I felt tears running down my face. This was why I'd taken the risk that night, why I'd exposed the Blackwell's fraud in such a public way. Not for revenge or vindication, but because sometimes people need the truth, even when it's brutal, to find their way to something real. Marcus's best man, a former college roommate who'd watched him struggle under his parents' expectations for years, gave a speech about transformation. The Marcus I knew in college loved numbers and analysis. His parents made him bury that passion to maintain their image. Watching him discover it again, watching him become the person he was meant to be, has been the privilege of my friendship. After dinner, as the small group mingled and celebrated, Isabella found me on the garden terrace overlooking the ocean. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that no expensive lighting could replicate. "Thank you," she said simply, "for seeing who I could be when I couldn't see it myself." "That's what family does," I replied. "We hold up mirrors, even when the reflection is uncomfortable." She laughed, that genuine laugh I remembered from our childhood before life got complicated. Uncomfortable is an understatement. "I wanted to die when you projected those financial records in front of everyone." "But you didn't die," I pointed out. "You woke up." We stood there in comfortable silence, watching the waves. Two cousins who'd almost lost each other to pretense and pride, now standing together in a moment of hard-won authenticity. "I start in the events department next month," Isabella said. "David thinks I'm ready." "You are," I confirmed. "You've worked harder in these 6 months than most people do in years." "It turns out humility is exhausting," she joked. "Who knew?" Marcus joined us on the terrace, loosening his tie with a relieved smile. "Wife number 2, he said to Isabella. "Think this one will stick?" "Only if you keep being the real version," she replied, kissing him softly. I left them there, 2 people who'd found each other twice, once in pretense and once in truth. The second version was messier, harder, built on actual work rather than image, but it was real. And real always lasts longer than fake. As I walked back through the resort, I passed staff members I'd hired, spaces I'd designed, details I'd agonized over during the renovation years ago. This place had been my first big risk, my first real proof that I could build something meaningful. Now it had given my cousin the same opportunity, just in a different way. The night manager nodded to me as I passed the front desk. A young couple was checking in, clearly on their honeymoon based on their luggage tags and the way they couldn't stop touching each other. They didn't know who I was, didn't know the story of transformation that had played out in these halls. They just knew this was a beautiful place to start their marriage. And maybe that was the point. Not every guest needed to know the drama, the work, the rebuilt relationships that had happened here. They just needed to experience the result, a place where people were treated with dignity, where real moments happened, where truth was valued over image. I left through the main entrance this time, not the service entrance where my journey that night had begun. The security guard, the same one from the wedding, stood at attention and wished me a good evening by name. He'd learned his lesson about assumptions. 6 months after the second wedding, Isabella was promoted to assistant events manager. Marcus had been promoted twice in accounting and was now managing the financial operations for 3 of my properties. They'd moved to a larger apartment and were talking about saving for a house. The biggest shock came when Marcus's father reached out, asking if there might be a job available. Not for him, he clarified, but he wanted advice on how to rebuild honestly. His marriage to Catherine had ended when she'd refused to accept their new financial reality, still chasing old money connections in Florida while he'd stayed behind to face their creditors. I met with him at a coffee shop, neutral territory. He looked older, humbler, worn down by the consequences of years of pretense. "I don't deserve your help," he said immediately. "I enabled my wife's schemes, lived off borrowed prestige, and almost destroyed my son's life. But I'm asking anyway because I don't know where else to turn." I studied him for a long moment. "What can you actually do?" I asked. "Not what you pretended to do, what you're actually good at." He thought about it, really thought, maybe for the first time in years. "I'm good with people," he finally said. "Not the fake schmoozing, but actually listening to them, understanding what they need. It's how I built the dealerships originally, before it all became about status." I took a chance on him. Put him in customer relations at one of my smaller properties, entry-level, with strict oversight. He exceeded every expectation, turned out to have a genuine gift for conflict resolution and guest satisfaction. Within a year, he was managing the entire customer service department. "Thank you for the second chance," he told me after his first annual review. Not many people would have given it. "Thank you for taking it seriously," I replied. Not many people do. The whole situation became something of a legend in my company. The wedding that almost was, the exposure of fraud, the transformation of everyone involved. New employees heard about it during orientation, not as gossip, but as a teaching moment about values, authenticity, and the importance of second chances. If you've made it this far in my story, thank you for listening. It's been quite a journey from that moment when the security guard directed me to the service entrance to watching my cousin build a genuine career and my former in-laws from hell's family rebuild their lives with integrity. The comment section is open, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had a moment where someone underestimated you completely? Have you had to call out family members for toxic behavior? How did you handle it? Drop your stories below, and don't forget to subscribe for more bridal confessions and wedding drama stories. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this tale of justice, transformation, and learning that who you are is always enough. Because at the end of the day, that's what I learned through this whole experience. I didn't need to prove myself to Isabella, to the Blackwells, or to anyone else. I just needed to be myself and let the truth speak for itself. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply living authentically and giving others the chance to do the same. The service entrance where my story began now has a small plaque that Isabella installed. It reads, "All entrances lead to the same destination. Choose kindness regardless of the door." It's cheesy maybe, but it's true. And truth, as it turns out, is always better than pretense, even when it's harder. If you're still here, this story meant something to you. Stories like this are why Bridal Confessions exists. So if you want more real stories about love, betrayal, and everything in between, subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep telling them. And if this one stayed with you, a like lets us know we're on the right path.